Okay, well, welcome to another episode of the Rest and Recovery Podcast. With me is Dr. Wendie Trubow, and she is a certified practitioner passionate about helping people eliminate invasive toxins that seem to be bombarding us in this world today. So, she's been an author of a book called Dirty Girl Ditch the Toxins and a regular featured in MindBodyGreen as well as the Huffington Post. So, Dr. Wendie, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Scott. Great to be here.
Yeah, it's really excited to have you on. The topic of toxins is something that gets thrown around and can be overwhelming at times, but also I think a critically important thing, as obviously you do, element of our health to really understand the what and the why behind what's happening and some of the corollaries to the rise of some chronic illnesses out there.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I would go so far as to say that just about any illness you can name, we could track back to toxins because they're so inflammatory. And depending on how you're going to manifest inflammation, it's going to show up for you as a diagnosis. But
Right.
it's whatever it is, it's some type of, it really simply too much of something that's harming you or not enough of something you need. And in the bucket of harming you, it almost always comes down to toxins.
Okay. And so what are the indicator lights? You mentioned the symptoms, so to speak, or diagnosis that we modern medicine is helpful in many ways, but diagnosis is often kind of the indicator light more than the root
Right.
cause.
Totally. Totally. So think of it like whatever's wrong with you has a root cause. Anything. Let's go head to toe. Hair loss, headaches, brain fog, endocrine dysfunction, meaning thyroid, hormonal dysfunction. For women, it could be low sex drive. For men, it could be low sex drive too. Weight gain, difficulty losing weight, metabolic syndrome, cancer, heart disease, high blood pressure, autoimmune disease, any chronic disease, any degenerative disease like
Oh, wow.
multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, asthma, irritable bowel, anything in the gut, bloating, gas, diarrhea, constipation, bloody stools, Crohn's disease, whatever it is, it has its root in something inflammatory, which often is a toxin. Sounds so depressing. I promise there's hope.
Yeah,
There's definitely
we're
hope.
starting off with a bang here. Well, but I mean, I think, to the point earlier of like, we really have to acknowledge the things that are influencing our lives. Now, I guess
Yeah.
the degree discussion might be the individual. Is that a fair way to position that?
Say that again.
Like the how much it infects an individual and how
Yeah.
inflammatory.
Yeah. So I would say we're all getting what I'll call death by 1,000 cuts throughout the day, right? Especially women. And you're not female, but we wake up and we wash our hair, we condition our hair, we put product in our hair, then we style our hair, and then we do our face with all kinds of products and makeups, and then we lotion our body, and then we put on clothes that came from the dry cleaner, or we're washed in something that has chemicals that we're putting on our body. By the way, we slept on a bed that most likely has flame retardants. And then we go downstairs and we get our coffee, which is often moldy and not organic. So we're getting a double dose of toxins. And then we get in our new car that has over 300 chemicals in it. So by the time you've left your house in the morning, you've been exposed to like 500 to 600 chemicals. And that's on
Yeah.
a good day, right? That's on the day when you didn't drink from the plastic water bottle. And there's a lot
And you
of
got
layers to
outside that
this.
day. Yeah.
Right. And then you went outside, but your neighbor just sprayed their lawn with Roundup and it's the wind is blowing. So you get a big dose of herbicide in your face. Or maybe you live next to the golf course and they spray routinely and you get the glyphosate. So there's a lot
Yeah.
of ways. So everybody's getting exposed. The extent to which you're going to react is what I'll call a blended soup,
Okay.
meaning there's your genetics, plays like 10 to 15% of what happens to you. It sets the stage, but then your lifestyle is the other 85 to 90%. So if you have genetics that put you at risk and then you lead a lifestyle that promotes toxin accumulation, then you're going to be someone who shows it
Okay.
more than someone else.
Yeah. And is that the epigenetics kind of thing, the
Some of
terminology, or
it,
is that
yeah, it's both. So I have the genes for celiac disease. I have two. I'm a genetic, I don't know, under or overachiever, right? Two genes for celiac, 2 genes for the MTHFR mutation, 2 genes for vitamin D deficiency. So I don't know, is that over or underachieving? I'm not really sure how to language that. So I have these genes, but if everyone who had both genes for celiac, everyone who has it doesn't become a celiac. So that's the impact of epigenetics, is turning on the gene and making it more likely to express itself, in my case, as an autoimmune disease. So that's the impact of the epigenetics, but it carries through generation after generation, which is what people talk about when they say generational trauma.
Mm-hmm.
It's something that happened to someone, and that change in the epigenetic gets perpetuated through the years. So through no fault of your own, you now have problems because your ancestors had whatever happened to them. So it impacts us.
So we have to account not only for our environment, but what happened to our great grandparents.
We have to account for our genetics and the potential that our epigenetics have turned those genes on in bad ways. And then we have to mitigate it by leading lives that mitigate it and control it and override it. Because it is absolutely, people will say, oh, I don't want to know if I have the gene for Alzheimer's. I'm like, yes, you do, because it'll mean that you are that much more engaged in preventing Alzheimer's, because it is preventable, as opposed to just being like, throw the cards up and say, well, I don't have any control. No, you have control. You have agency and control over this, and we want to give it back to you.
And that's a great point on the agency is, we made the joke of, we're starting off with a bang and all these negative connotations, but it's really about equipping you with the information to make better choices.
Totally.
So how do you go about assessing that and determining, some of the common types or things to equip the individual so they're not overwhelmed?
Yeah, this is a great question. So what I'll say is you need to do this with a functional medicine provider, because when I was in conventional medicine, I was thinking when you go to Whole Foods, there's organic and there's conventional. So when I was in conventional medicine, I didn't have these tools available to me. It's simply an issue of training, mindset, and tools. Mm-hmm. So I didn't have these tools in my conventional practice. It was focused on obstetrics, gynecology, women's care, very sort of run-of-the-mill traditional behavior. And so if you go to your primary care doctor and say, hey, test me for mercury, they're going to do a blood test and it'll be negative and they'll tell you to go on your way. But the mercury in your system isn't stored in your blood unless you've had just a massive exposure right now or in the last few weeks. You're not going to show it in your blood. So it's stored in your largely your fat and your organs. Lead is stored largely in your bones, fat, and organs. And so speaking of that, the brain is a very fatty organ, and toxins love to be stored there because it's very rich for them. Anyway, when you want evaluation, you need to see a functional medicine provider, because they're the ones who have the right tools in their toolbox for that. So I almost never start with toxins as an evaluation, honestly, because think of all of the things that we're doing in life. So if you come to the functional medicine provider and you're not sleeping, or maybe you have fatigue, or maybe you have some irritable bowel, or your hair is thinning, or your periods are a little off, or your sex drive is a little low, you definitely have a toxins issue. However, we can't fix the toxins until we've fixed your life. So that's your gut, your adrenals, your minerals and nutrients. Are you sleeping? Are you pooping every day? Are you moving your body, both cardiovascular wise and muscles? Are you training your heart and your body? Because it's both.
Yep.
Are you a stress ball? Those are what I'll call the foundation of your health. And we can't do detox in a situation where you're not sleeping, or you are in a toxic relationship or job, or you're eating at a fast food restaurant 3 times a day. That's its own toxic burden, but we have to deal with getting you eating food that works for you, sleeping, getting out of that relationship that's so toxic for you, because detox is a higher order behavior. It occurs when your body feels safe. And if your body feels like it's in a state of fight, flight, or freeze, or it's not rested, you're not going to prioritize toxins removal. So you really have to do the foundation. And then finally, I'll answer your question, which was, how do people get evaluated? So how you get evaluated, you've dealt with the toxins. And as a side note, I'll say there are every once in a while people who I will prioritize toxins first, like my 32-year-old patient who had metastatic recurrent breast cancer. We're heading for toxins very, immediately, because
Okay.
she clearly has a very toxic system. So there are always exceptions, but typically, this is what we do. And what we're looking for are, I'll call it 3 categories. There's the heavy metals, which is lead, mercury, thallium, cadmium, arsenic. There's more, but those are really the ones. Like, I don't really care about bismuth. I care about lead and mercury. Those are the nasty ones.
Yeah.
Then there's the mycotoxins. These are the toxins that mold puts out when you get a mold exposure. And this is a plug for 50% of buildings have had water damage. So you're statistically probable to have had a water damage exposure in your lifetime, from your home, the school you went to, the dorm you lived in, the place you visited. It's almost impossible to not have had an exposure when you think of traveling through life.
Okay.
And then the third category is, I'll call other. These are all the environmental toxins around us, in us, through us. This is air and water quality. This is what our water is treated with chlorine, which is perchlorate. This is what our bed is sprayed with so that the bed doesn't light on fire while we're smoking in bed. Not that most of us smoke in bed, but that's why we have flame retardants in our bed, right? So
really? That was the
think about it.
genesis?
Yeah, because everyone used to live in tenement houses, and so if
Right.
one person smoked in bed, the whole row went up. So it made sense at the time, but now that we live much differently, if you smoke and you smoke in bed, you definitely need flame retardants in your bed. But if you don't, if you think about the whole house is burning, the mattress not burning is not going to help you.
Yeah.
Right? Like that's not going to be helpful if everything around you has gone up in flames.
Yeah.
You won't ride your mattress to safety.
Yeah.
So
Good metaphor for your physical nature too, and
yeah,
what we're
right.
talking about.
Can't ride the mattress to safety. We'll make that a book title. So okay, so that the other category is all the stuff around us, the plastics, the vegan leather, the chemicals that we're using in our beauty products, in our food. It's a almost endless list, but it's measurable. So we look at these 3 categories.
Okay. Okay. And then when it comes to addressing that, you mentioned prioritization. Obviously, there's some extreme cases. Is there a methodology that you recommend on, because it can be overwhelming, like we said, there may be other restraints in life, financial, what have you, as you gradually peel some of these things off. What's the path of progress relative to that?
Yeah, I think it's really important to talk about this, because everyone thinks to themselves, oh, if I were only rich, I would do that. But it's more about your approach to life than your financial status. So yes, it's easier to do when you have more money, but the things to prioritize would be get enough sleep at night. That's free. Your body detoxes while you sleep. Avoid or significantly minimize alcohol, because that's a toxin. And it's a life-threatening toxin. So you're going to prioritize removal of alcohol over all other toxins. So you'll shut the system for detox down because all you can deal with is alcohol.
Okay.
So that would save you money. Work on avoiding packaged and processed food. That might be more expensive, right? Because processed food is pretty cheap compared to vegetables, proteins, and fruits. So that's an area that is challenging for people sometimes, but it's impactful. And typically what I recommend is use the environmental working group Dirty Dozen. That's a list of the 12 most pesticide-laden foods, and the Clean 15, which are the foods that are the least covered with pesticides. So if you could do nothing but those 27 foods, you'd make a big difference, right? Those 12 foods are the dirtiest, and the 15 foods are the cleanest. If you include those in your eating, you've now gone a long way to minimizing toxins in what you're putting in your body, because glyphosate is the most commonly used herbicide in the world, and its use is doubling about so far. It's a changed trajectory, but it's about every 7 years, although it might be increasing more. So it's implicated in autoimmune disease, microbiome dysfunction, cancer. Like, you don't want that, but it's all over our food. So, so it's free to prioritize things like sleep, sweat, get sweaty.
Right.
It helps you detox, it conditions your heart, it helps with stress reduction. And that leads me to my next thing, which is manage your stress. Like all of these things are basically free. You don't need, except for the buying organic wherever possible. And if finances are a challenge, you can go for frozen over fresh.
Right. Well,
But there's a lot you can do.
yeah, and with that one too, on the food pieces, like you're going
Yeah,
to pay for it somewhere, right? It's
you
either
are.
in the immediate on the food shifting or down the line where, you might have some of these severe illnesses like cancer that you mentioned.
Yeah, I think but that doesn't get people motivated. It just helps them understand, right? Like
Yeah.
you're going to pay for this someday doesn't at all impact a teenager. They're like, yeah, whatever. But
Yep.
if you say to
Great
them,
point.
your skin will be clearer, you're going to randomly. And by the way, think of food as toxins too, because you can have too much of food, particularly around gluten and the way it's been hybridized. It can be pretty nasty for athletes. And so what's so interesting, one of my first functional medicine patients was a 27-year-old runner. And she's, if you're either a runner or you're not, I'm not. She is a runner. So she was running, I don't know, she was running a normal mile, whatever it is for a normal mile. And she's in a running club. And it turns out she's super sensitive to gluten on testing. So I take her off gluten. She comes back and she tells me, oh, my stomach ache is gone. And I was like, you never told me you had a stomach ache. Like I take really meticulous notes. Because, oh
Yeah.
yeah, I always felt that. So I never really talked about it because it was always there, but now it's gone. But even cooler than that was that a few months into treatment, she said to me, so the only thing I changed was getting rid of gluten. And I shaved 26 seconds off my running mile.
Wow. That's
I
awesome.
know. Adults don't shave 26 seconds off the running mile. I
Yeah.
learned all this because she's a runner and she told me all about this because I was like, oh, that sounds cool. She goes, no, listen, Dr. T, like this is amazing. So, if you're sensitive to a particular food and you eliminate that food, your performance increases. So athletes and teenagers, that'll, you're going to pay someday won't get their attention, but you might
Yeah.
improve your performance and recover faster. That gets people's attention. You're
It's a
going to
great
have more
point.
energy when you wake up in the morning.
Yeah.
That gets there.
What are
But
some
you're right.
motivating factors to address with folks?
Say more about that because that's like a massive question. I want to make sure
Yeah.
I don't go down
Yeah.
like the rabbit
Well,
hole and
just
you're like, oh, I didn't want that.
well, I mean, just pulling on that same thread, right? How to to your point, the human behavior is the challenge. It's not a knowledge gap per se in
Right.
many things.
Yeah. So there's definitely a component of brain in this, and that thought pattern of I once wrote a blog that said, put your own air mask on first.
Hmm.
Because
Yeah.
for so many humans, they're so busy taking care of others and running around that self-care and doing what works for your body and your life and your soul and your purpose gets kind of squished down. Now, obviously, if you have a newborn, you're going to take care of them. That's
Right.
not about that.
Right.
But it's more about when you get out of the survival process, having the mindset of it matters for me to take care of myself, because the better care, and I've taken this on, this was the hardest thing I ever had to learn as a parent, was the
Hmm.
better I am cared for, the better I will be able to care for my kids, because I'm not in overwhelm and overload and dysfunction and stress and like, oh my God all the time. I can
Yeah.
go, oh wait, that's a priority. So the first part of hacking your life and having an amazing life and feeling freaking amazing is really getting in the mindset of this matters, right?
Yeah.
It's not a guilty indulgence. No, this is actually the way you live to at least 100 without chronic disease, and that your energy gets better every decade. So,
Yeah.
so the first part is the mindset. And then the
Mhm.
second part, I would say, I remember I used to volunteer with a guy who was a professional tennis player, and then he became a professional tennis coach. And one of the most impactful things I ever heard him say was he was coaching a guy who was in the top 50 tennis players in the world, which to me, as I'm neither a runner nor a tennis player, so as a non-tennis player, that sounded pretty impressive, right? You're in the top 50 in the world.
Right.
At the time there were like 5 billion people in the world, so that sounded really impressive. But the guy wanted to be in the top 10. And the coaching he gave him was hang out with people who are in the top 10 if you want to be in the top 10.
Mm.
So I remember thinking, if you want to be successful at something, you need to surround yourself with people who are in the same game that you are, at the level that you are. So for the people who want to optimize their health, you need a community of people to keep you in the game, to support you when you fall. I was thinking about, you can't really use the language hold you accountable. It's not accurate. You don't hold anyone else accountable. You provide the structures for them to hold themselves accountable. So surround yourself, right? Like, I can't make you do anything.
Yeah.
I can remind you of who you're meant to be.
Mm-hmm.
And I can represent you to what you're committed to, but only you can hold yourself accountable and make those changes. So having said that, I meet with a coach 3 times a week to hold myself accountable and to get coaching, right? Because I want to be in the top 10 X, right? Like,
Right.
I'm interested
Yeah.
in being in the top of my game. And so back to what can people do? What other hacks? So get a mindset that it matters to do this, because that will be your why. It matters, right? I want to, whatever your why is, that's like 50 years away, right? I actually want to walk my great grandchildren down the aisle
100%.
as the revered great granny.
Yeah,
That's what I want. I don't have grandchildren yet, but I want that. So that's like, I want to be an inspiration to generations of humans. That's my why. And so in those moments where I'm like, oh, I don't want to, right? It
yeah.
helps me.
Happens.
And in those, and I have a coach too. So I call her, I don't want to, I so don't want to help me get presents to who I'm supposed to be in the world. So surround yourself with people who can remind you of who you're meant to be. Even if it's one person and you talk to them twice a week, they don't have to be your spouse or your significant other or your, they don't even have to be your friend, right? It's just someone who's committed to the same thing you're committed to.
Yeah. That's
Right?
such a huge message, I think, for all folks. But you mentioned the parenting piece, and I think it's, what I've observed too is even, I think it's a heavier burden for women as mothers to carry that on, and um, the false narrative that it's somehow selfish to care for yourself. Because what ends up happening is we end up showing up, parents, everybody, not as who we want to be, and that creates a negative cascade.
Right. And then we just circle the drain. So yes, 100%.
Yeah. And so I think that's a powerful message to, there's a purpose behind it so you can serve better, not just yourself, but those around you that you care about.
Yeah. And here's the card I pull out for women who are really resistant to this coaching, because I only see women in my practice. So I have ample opportunities to coach them. And the card I pull out is, when your child, if you're a mom who's really strung out, and when your child is grown, do you want them to behave like you're behaving now? Do you want them to be someone who is strung out, not taking care of themselves, not sleeping properly, not moving their bodies, eating crappy food because they're just whatever, it's just easy? Do you want them to behave that way? Because if you do, you are doing an A+ job at role modeling.
Mm-hmm.
But if you don't, you have to actually be the role model for who you want them to be.
Yeah.
And it was such a hard, I did not learn this lesson until I have 4 kids. I didn't learn the lesson until my older 2 were probably past that stage. And now I'm trying to clean it up with them. Like, no, you need to take care of yourself. My oldest will push until she drops. And I'm like, no, but I did that.
Yep.
Right. So it's hard to say, don't do it. Don't do what I used to do. But now I can clearly say, like, don't do what I'm doing, because that's not the way to make the profound impact on the world. You're not going to get there by killing yourself. You're going to get there by working better. Don't work harder, work better.
Yeah, I can totally relate to that. And it's similar scenario, oldest, and the FOMO, right? Fear of missing out, especially at the teenage years. There's always something going on or somewhere you want to be. And it's definitely an interesting mental wrestling match within yourself.
Yeah. And I mean, at this point, she's got to get there for herself. I can just keep saying, there's another option possible here when you're ready. Right.
Yeah. Totally.
My younger 2 have definitely taken it on, which is great to see.
So, with the toxins, we kind of touched on, I want to circle back to that a little bit. You've rattled off a number of them. Are there some that are more aggressive than others that should be prioritized, or?
Yeah, so this conversation will make you crazy. So let me start by saying you're never going to be toxin free. And you're never going to be toxin free. So that let's just acknowledge that. And we put together a whole summit for looking at how do you up your game. It's called the Environmental Toxicants, Autoimmunity and Chronic Diseases Summit, because we're all about reversing autoimmunity and chronic diseases through resolution of toxins. But you're never going to be at a zero-sum game.
Mm-hmm.
You won't ever go, even when you're born, you have over 150 chemicals in your umbilical cord. So you're exposed to a deluge of toxins before you even come on this earth. So it's not, the mindset is not, oh, I'm going to be toxin free. The mindset is, in some senses, I want to prioritize the bad actors. Absolutely. And let's come back to that.
Mm-hmm.
And then in some sort of senses, what you want to do is decrease your total body exposure so that your body is no longer drowning under the waterfall, and that it can actually just kind of wade in the shallow end and go, okay, I can get rid of this and I can get rid of that, as opposed to just like, I can't deal with anything, like that Lucille Ball episode where the chocolates are coming faster than she can deal with it. So really that what comes by you can deal with, as opposed to what comes by, you're like, no, can't deal with it, can't deal with it, can't deal with it. And here you are, fat, sick, and nearly dead, as the guy who made the movie about was fat, sick, and nearly dead because of the accumulation of the toxins. And when I say toxins, to me, a toxic lifestyle, toxic food, toxic thoughts, they're all included in that bucket.
Okay.
It's your life.
Yeah.
Okay. So what do you want to prioritize? So Massachusetts in 1989 did a study that showed that 1 in 6 deaths could be tracked back to air or water quality. So that's, I know, right? That's like 18% of deaths are due to air or water quality. So I would say it's a pretty low hanging fruit to filter your water to the best of your financial ability. So if what you can get is a Brita, get a Brita. If what you can get is a Berkey, get a Berkey. If you can do a point of use reverse osmosis or charcoal filter, get that. If you can do a whole house water filter, get that. Like, do whatever you can do to the best of your ability.
Yeah.
And then to the best of your financial ability, filter your air. So that's either whole house or individual rooms. Filter your air in your office, filter your air to the best of your ability. So that's kind of the low hanging fruit. Food, okay. You do it 3 times a day, maybe more. So when you're eating, you're getting potentially a load of toxins if you're eating food that has pesticides on it. So minimize the processed food, minimize conventional non-organic food, and maximize organic foods. Okay. These are sort of platform things you can stand on and do every day.
Yeah.
Big toxins to avoid. I mean, they're all big, right? So if it's the issue is that we're getting big exposures and we're getting multiple big exposures. So do your best. Don't drink from single-use plastic water bottles, because that's a tremendous endocrine disruptor and it's bad for the earth. So it's a dual bad.
Yeah, and it just seems to it's compounding interest. Right. Yes. But from a negative, but you can stem that tide. And to your point of like, start small. I heard this term, I think it was military, but start small, ram fast. Right. And just start with what you can, get those wins, get those small wins, shift how and being aware, but then start applying it gradually, and it'll compound interest in a positive way over time.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about, if you make one positive change a week, at the end of the year, you've made 52 positive changes. And if you've sustained all of them, that's a tremendous leap forward for your health. So, and you're never going to be perfect, right? Perfection is the enemy of good. Just
Right.
do a good job and do a solid job. And, we're running a program called the Feel Freaking Amazing program. It's an 8-week elimination program with a detox focus. And people are like, what happens when the program's done? But while they're in it, they're like, do I have to be perfect? I'm like, no, you don't have to be perfect. Yeah. You just have to minimize the time that you're off the rails. You're going to go off the rails. You're going to go to a wedding or party or birthday. You're going to go to these things and eat stuff that you do not want to eat normally.
Yeah.
Fine. Plan it in. Be like, yep, I'm eating that at that time. But then get back on your protocol like that, right? Get back on what works for you. Don't use those excursions as an excuse to abuse yourself ongoingly. Do it once, get back on the plan. So
that's a great point. I think of just like kind of not desensitizing, but taking that mental emotional load, like I did it wrong. It's a
Right.
trending thing. It's about 80-20, do what you
Yeah.
can with what you have, uh,
Yeah.
to really
And
build
and
that up.
and don't forget that your thoughts can be toxic for you. So all those thoughts like, oh, you're such a failure, you screwed it up again, you're
Right.
never going to get that, zip them, because they are super disempowering. So those thoughts need to be converted into, I am working really hard on this. I am doing the best I can. I forgive myself.
Yeah.
Whatever, right? Convert it into something that works for you, so that, because when you have a stressful thought, your adrenals kick in. They say to the liver, don't do detox, because guys, a lion's going to eat us. It doesn't know that you're just having a stupid thought that's disempowering. So then you shut down your liver, you shut down your gut, and all the toxins hang out in you, and you store them in your fat. And you're like, why did I gain 5 pounds in a month? Tell you why.
Yeah. Yeah. So we're talking a lot about the toxins, the negative side of things, but some of this is, to me, about it's a new favorite word, resilience. It's
Yeah.
about shifting our body into being more resilient. To your point, toxins are going to be there,
Mhm.
but you want your body as strong and resilient as possible to fight those off, which is your immune system and other things. But what are some things that we can do on the positive side of the ledger, to build up the strength to be resilient?
I mean, these are the things we've talked about, and I'm happy to harp on this, because they and I didn't mean to make it sound like you're harping. Like I talk about this all the time, that the things that are super impactful are free. Get at least 8 hours in bed, if not 9, every night. Women tend to need more sleep than men.
Yeah.
That's just, I'll paint our gender with a big broad brushstroke. We tend to need more sleep. So my husband, I don't think it's healthy for him, but he sleeps an hour and a half less than I do every night. Maybe 2 hours, actually, depending on the day, right?
Yeah.
And he uses that time to exercise and meditate, and he's like, I don't have any other time to do it. And I'm like, okay, but you're not sleeping enough, and that's not good for you. So right now he's unfortunately prioritizing, well, I mean, I guess it's sort of a mixed bag, right? He's
Yeah.
prioritizing meditation and movement, which he needs to do. However, he's not getting enough sleep, so it's something he's struggling with. So get enough sleep. And I use a Whoop to track my heart rate variability and recovery. And sometimes it doesn't match up. I'm like, God, I feel like a truck ran over me, and it's saying I'm 98% recovered. I'm like, I don't get it. But but that's more about the heart rate variability than the fact that I'm rested, right?
Right.
It's a little bit different. So get enough sleep every night, because your body detoxes when you sleep, and you recover when you sleep, and your mitochondria and telomeres are happy when you sleep. Now, they're happy when you move too, but they're happy when you rest and rejuvenate.
Yeah.
Don't transform your toxic thoughts into empowering ones. Stop being so mean to yourself. You would never say those things to anyone else. Don't say them to yourself either,
It's
because
amazing
they,
the systemicness of self-talk. It
yes,
really is.
yes, it's so toxic, Scott. Like, it's so bad for you. So don't do that to yourself.
Yeah.
What were you
So
gonna say?
what is the byproduct of that self-talk? Like you're saying it's toxic. So what's kind of transpiring there?
Yeah, so I'll give you an example. About, gosh, it was probably like 5 or 6 years ago. We went to California, and we were driving from Palm Springs to LA. It's like a 2-hour drive. And I said to my husband, wow, they must be doing some really weird construction, because we were in the left lane, and there were these like 12-foot cement barriers on the left-hand side of the road. It was at the highway.
Mhm.
And so we're in the left lane and driving, and my husband's driving, out of the corner of my eye, excuse me, I see the car, 2 cars over, 2 lanes over, starts to swerve. And I was like, uh-oh. And I had this thought, it's like, it's all very instantaneous. Oh my
Sure.
God, the car 2 cars over is going to swerve into the car that's just right. This is us, and this car is right here, and they're going to swerve in front of us and hit us from that car over there, because
Yeah.
that car is going to swerve into this car, which will swerve into our lane, and we've got nowhere to go because we're on a barrier. So
Right.
I start screaming, brake, 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 and my husband does. The car in front of us swerves right in front of us. We don't hit anyone. There was nobody behind us, so nobody hit us when we slammed on the brakes. Nothing happened. Nothing happened. Okay. But I had this thought, we're going to get in a massive car accident. And my 4 kids are back in Palm Springs with my mom, and she's going to have to navigate this. And we're going to have left our kids parentless. And it's going to be such a breakdown. All of these thoughts happen like instantaneously, right? But nothing happened. I want to stress, nothing happened. I'm still here, thank God. But for 2 days, I was like a jittery, anxious mess, because what happened in that moment of thinking all those thoughts, I was kind of piling on, were my adrenals thought, massive stress coming. Okay, cortisol, pump. Adrenals shut down the liver. So detox wasn't happening. I wasn't focused on detox at that point. The gut shuts down. So the food sitting in my gut was just sitting there. But really, it was that cortisol impact, that massive flush of cortisol. And essentially, it took me 2 days to recover from that. And I said to my husband, I can gauge how resilient I am and how much I've recovered from the years of doing obstetrics and the toll that took, because I am not constitutionally designed to be awake for 36 hours. It's just not my constitution, but I did it. And it really wrecked my health. And I can gauge how recovered I am by how I respond to stressors like that. And I can gauge now that I'm barely recovered because not getting in a car accident still made me so messed up.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Like
Yeah, it really does. I think it's illuminating in the sense of we talk about accounting for the toxins in our life, but the different emotional traumas and toxins and the impact it can have on us that we often will blow off and just ignore and roll on. And really, to your point, you know, quote unquote, nothing happened, but it was a traumatic almost. So imagine the impact that things could have if an actual accident occurred.
Exactly.
And, you know, personal anecdote too, got rear-ended recently. And, you know, at some point I was like, yeah, I feel fine, but then kept getting encouraged, no, keep going with the recovery process, because your body, things are going to pop up later.
Yes.
And the point is, like, you know, it could be months later where suddenly there's issues or stagnation or challenges.
Yeah, it's really, especially for people who tend to be more traditional, you can have this thought like, oh, what's it doing? But it really is very impactful at a scientific level. There's data on this. You know, you have a thought, your cortisol kicks in, cortisol tells the liver what to do. And instead of processing toxins, liver's other job is to store things like vitamin A, D, E, and K, and your stores of sugar. So your liver will put out sugar. Now your sugar goes up. Now you're like, or before your sugar goes up, you're craving food. And you're like, why am I craving sugar and carbs? It's because your body thinks a lion is chasing you and you have to run. So until that, but then your liver puts out the stores of glycogen, which turn into glucose. And now you have all the sugar floating around. Now your pancreas is like, wait, what? Okay. So it puts out insulin. And over time, what you're setting the stage for is repeated sugar. Sugar is probably the most inflammatory thing ever. Glucose, I don't mean sugar, well, sugar in the form of glucose, because ultimately, even though it keeps us alive, it's not a particularly efficient form of energy, and it's very toxic to our at a cellular level. Okay. So long term, if we rely on sugar for food, now weirdly, everything gets broken down into glucose. You know, even a steak eventually will get broken down, but the energy it takes to break it down is where it's impactful to eat high protein, high fiber vegetables, because it takes so long to break them down into their final state, and you extract all the energy from that. So it's intrinsically more useful and valuable. And because it doesn't go right to sugar from eating it, you don't get that massive glucose spike. And so your blood sugar stays more level, which is impactful for heart health and risk of diabetes long term. Okay. It's all long term.
Exactly. That's what we're all looking for.
Long game. We're playing the long game here.
Yeah, it's all about longevity. And I think that's the encouraging conversations, I think, at a macro, and what you're doing is really addressing those things that are preventative from that longevity and aligning to our whys.
Yeah. And I mean, you can't study yourself. So people will be like, what am I not going to see? Is this going to prevent blah, blah? I'm like, I don't know. I don't know if you would have gotten it, right? But so what I do think is that it's impactful to honor what your body needs. You know, you wouldn't give your Maserati 87 oil. right?
Right.
You would never do, or 87 gasoline, you would never do that to a high performance car. You would never leave the high performance car out in the rain. You would never drive it in the winter. I mean, you would just not do things to a high performance car because you want it to perform optimally.
Right.
But your body is a high performance car. It needs particular care in order to perform at the level you want it to perform.
Yeah, that's a great analogy of just how you fuel yourself, right?
Mm-hmm.
Of putting that high octane fuel in your body so it's going to run more effectively. And going back to one of the comments, but it doesn't seem like anything is immediate. So we're so in that immediate gratification nowadays that we want that sugar hit, but we are playing the long game, and it takes kind of that steadfast action.
Yeah, let's talk about that for a minute, Scott. So you won't see it if you're eating it every day, you won't see it. But if you take it out and then reintroduce it, you'll probably see it.
That's a great point.
So you can't see the impact. I mean, before I was diagnosed with celiac, which is an allergy to, essentially an autoimmune allergy to gluten, which is contained in bread, cake, cookie, candy, pasta, beer. I used to love a good beer, but it
Yeah,
does not love me back. So anyway, before I got
I'm
this
with you.
diagnosis, I didn't really understand that gluten was having any impact on my body. If you had said, does gluten bother you? I would have said no. And like, I have no problems from gluten, except when I got rid of gluten and could look back on it and said, oh, okay, I had brain fog, I had hair loss, I had anxiety, I had heart palpitations, I had asthma, I had
Mhm.
irritable bowel syndrome. So I had constipation, diarrhea, bloating, gas, all in the same day. God knows what I was getting throughout the day. I had
Right.
difficulty conceiving, I had
Wow.
wasting, and my body hurt. So I had 10 things that I could directly point to, but only after I got rid of it. So when you're in, just like a frog, when you're in that water and it starts to slowly increase in heat, you do not notice it. You only notice it when you leave the heat, or if the heat turns up really fast, like it can do if you were to get into a car accident or have a major trauma or a brain injury, something happens, or get COVID, something happens, you could then notice the impact of it because all of a sudden you're really sick, whereas
Yeah.
before you're just kind of getting by. But yes, until you take it away, you don't notice it, but then you notice it.
Yeah. That was
Worth
my
a try.
very similar experience with gluten is, and I just had this conversation the other day, why I went gluten free or if I was celiac. I don't know if I officially am, but I know how I feel once I went back on.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't feel good. And it's just like avoid it. But to your point, when you pull it out and reintroduce things, and that's the benefit of doing elimination diets and things of
Yeah.
that nature to really understand how your body responds to certain things.
Some really brilliant, I think he's a pediatrician and he died recently. He was one of the founders of functional medicine. I think he said, if you're sitting on a tack and you take out the tack, you're going to feel a lot better. But if you're sitting on 10 tacks and you take out a tack, you're not going to really feel that much better. So the value of an elimination diet is that it takes out all the top allergens. So you can actually see, is there something in there that you are reacting to? Because if you pull them out one at a time, you might not see it as clearly as if you pull the grouping out and then systematically add it back in. So you can see, oh, what am I reacting to? Oh, I didn't know I was reactive to corn, right? Like,
Exactly.
who
Exactly.
would have thought? So
Right.
it's really cool to see that.
Well, Dr. Wendie, we're kind of coming up on time. I really appreciate your insights, your mission in educating and equipping folks to be aware of the toxins out there and then how to proceed. You have your book, I see it behind you, and I think you had mentioned you have an event coming up.
Yes.
Um, Maybe you can mention that real quick.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. So we're all about getting the word out. So we are putting on a summit called the Environmental Toxicants, Autoimmunity and Chronic Diseases Summit. It's launching very shortly. It's launching on April 11th, where we brought together the top experts in the field of functional medicine to look at how do we decrease our burden, improve our health, reverse chronic disease, reverse autoimmune disease, and feel freaking amazing. So we have people like Mark Hyman, Terry Walls, Deanna Minnick, Will Cole, we have Joel Kahn, we have just Brian Vasey, we have industry
Wow.
leaders. It goes on,
Yeah.
Ari Witten. I'm like, oh my God, everybody on the summit is amazing. So it's a free event, which I love because you're essentially getting the expertise of world leaders for free, which is crazy to think because a lot of these people charge a lot of money to see them.
Yeah.
And then there is lifetime access for a VIP option available. If people want to say, oh my gosh, I want to listen to this over and over, they can opt into that, but it's free to listen to.
Awesome.
And we'll put the link in the show notes so that people can go right to that. But my gosh, register. Like, the control is in your hands and it starts today. Don't wait.
That's awesome. And that's a great message on we're more empowered. And you mentioned that towards the beginning of the conversation of agency. We're empowered. And that's, I think, the mindset of culture right now that's being shifted is like, you don't have to be the victim or victimized by circumstance. You're equipped, and events like this will equip you with that information. So thank you.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
All right, Dr. Wendie, thank you so much.